Okay, guys, we are back. Thank you for joining us here at the Cloud Sherpa. Today, I have a very special guest, Johnny Anderson. And Johnny, I want to give you maybe a quick intro. Let you give a quick intro, and then we'll jump into maybe your bio, and then dig a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, my name's Johnny Anderson. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. I was, after a background in telecommunications and on sales teams, I became co-owner of Resource Communications Group here in Nashville. We started off as an agency. We were 10 years old when my team bought the company. Did a very quick pivot to a new business model in the industry called Telecom Department as a Service. Had a great run of it. After a 5-year stint, had a successful exit, did some great things while we were there. And then the past couple of years, I have been wandering the earth, trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, trying to help the local community by some hard-learned lessons that I learned, mostly in the don't do it this way category, and happy to be here talking to you.
Yeah, well, cool, man. Well, look, I'm going to give you a little bit more credence. I'll read your bio here that I have, and then I want to dive into a little bit more about really where you're at today, and it'll be part of this bio. But I want to dig deep onto what you're doing right now around the whole imposter syndrome. So let me jump into this, and then we'll go from there, Johnny. So Johnny Anderson is a recognized leader in the greater Nashville technology and entrepreneur community, known for building ecosystems where people and ideas actually thrive. He serves on the board of directors for the Greater Nashville Technology Council, where he is also an advisor and co-creator of Emerging Leaders in Tech and Engineering, or ELITE, program. Johnny is an entrepreneur in residence and actually an incoming board member at the Nashville Entrepreneurial Center, and a founding member of the Board of Advisors for the Department of Management at MTSU Jennings A. Jones College of Business, reflecting his deep commitment to mentoring the next generation of founders and leaders. Over his career, Johnny has blended strategy, telecom, and brand leadership, most notably as co-owner of Resource Communications Group, a pioneer of the Telecom Department as a service model. His impact has been recognized with honors including GNTC Champion of the Year, Inc. 5000 recognition, Channel Futures Top 101 Technology Advisor, and Nashville Dealmakers of the Year. In 2025, he launched the Impodsters, a podcast tackling imposter syndrome and with honesty, humor, and hard-earned wisdom. Because even successful leaders sometimes need to admit they are figuring it out as they go. And I can attest to that one right there.
Derek, I like your version better. I need to up my game on that. That is very triggering of the imposter syndrome, all that stuff. But
yeah,
that's I guess that is what I've been up to.
So let's dig into this a little bit, because at the Cloud Sherpa here, we talk a lot about cloud services. Things like VMware and the debacle there, plus communications. We've talked a lot about what's going on in the news with Avaya pulling out of, the small contact centers and things like that. But a lot of people hit us up on the channel that are looking at, hey, I want to become a consultant, or, what would it take to be a consultant? And I know with what you're doing today around this whole imposter syndrome is something that a lot of young entrepreneurs struggle with. And I'm sure you talk a lot about that within some of the endeavors that you get into. So I want you to tell me a little bit about, let's start off with kind of defining imposter syndrome, what it is, and, how to recognize it if you are trying to, get into this field.
Yeah. Actually, in the podcast, The Impodsters, every episode we do what we call the definition of the day. in the very beginning. And the reason why we do that is because there are so many variables of what is imposter syndrome. It is poorly defined. It's a little nebulous, but there's a lot of great work being done right now. And while imposter syndrome is not really an official, it's not the DSM, it's not in as far as an accepted term in psychology. There's just a lot of debate around it.
Okay.
And so it can be a little difficult to define. So one of the best definitions that I have ever heard is that imposter syndrome is the inability to experience past accomplishments. And that past is very important as an indicator, because it creates a certain level of clarity, and I can explain why. But it's the inability to experience past accomplishments as though they are earned or deserved. And I'll give you an example. You look at the wall, there's plaques. You look in the bank account, the money hit, the sale of the company. You have these tangible things that you can look at that should be proof of your ability, your competence level, your accomplishments. But inside of you, there is this doubt. And it is typically more of a pathological doubt. It's more of a fundamental doubt. It's not, I am currently in a situation where I'm out over my skis and I feel doubt. That's called judgment. That's called good judgment. Oftentimes, there is a misunderstanding of good common sense as imposter syndrome. I have argued for quite some time that that line is a lot more higher up on the spectrum of a more pathological level of self-doubt is really where true imposter syndrome kicks in. And so it's the inability to experience your successes as though they're earned or deserved.
So basically you're saying at the core of it, it's just self-doubt, right?
Yeah, it is a version of self-doubt, and it is at an extreme level where the argument could be is that it transcends self-doubt and becomes something else, and that something else is imposter syndrome.
So then how would an entrepreneur balance this idea of, hey, I don't want to doubt myself, but yet I don't want to go into situations looking so arrogant that I end up falling on my face? I mean, how do you balance that?
So that is a complicated, it's a simple question with a complicated answer. What we always recommend, number one, is understand if you are experiencing a fundamental level of self-doubt, if self-doubt is a companion, if it rides shotgun with you every day, then you need to do your research and get an understanding of, is this potentially on the spectrum of imposter syndrome? And a lot of people would argue that imposter syndrome goes farther down into the spectrum. I'm not here to have that argument. I have my stances. But for this conversation and to help people that are looking into, that self-assessment, first off is just research. Try to understand the topic. What does the term mean? And then you need to reflect after your research. You need to reflect and really try to think through, is what I'm feeling just normal situational self-doubt that goes away? Or is it something more sinister? And once a person can get at least a close answer to that, then the world opens up to them. There are TED Talks, there are books, there are things out there that my podcast and several others quite like it, that they can go and they can continue to do their research to try to understand, what is this thing called imposter syndrome? And is it something that I'm dealing with? Or is this just, I'm having good judgment because I am out over my skis?
Gotcha. So when you say dealing with it, what does that entail? So if somebody says, hey, I'm doubting myself, I just don't know if I'm good enough. I'm reminded of the old Saturday Night Live skit, right? I'm good enough. I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how do you address it in the sense that like what practical advice would you give somebody that says, "Hey, if you're feeling self-doubt, this is what you need to do, or this is how you handle it, or this is how you even start to address it."
Well, that first line is really around the self-awareness component. So trying to come up with a baseline for yourself. Is this just a light version? Is this something more pathological where it's always a companion and self-doubt is in the back of my head consistently? So once you have that baseline, then again, there are things that you can start doing. One thing that I always recommend is not everyone needs to be in therapy. Therapy can help. Getting guidance from a professional is always a good idea, and there may be some underlying things that need to be worked through that only therapy helps it, or
Hmm.
only therapy will address this certain component. Then we get over into the areas that I think are a little more universal, and I think this is something that if you're in business, every person needs this, and that's have a community. And that community could be a peer-to-peer network.
Yep.
If you don't have at least 3 mentors, you are robbing yourself of an opportunity. And in those communities that you're building, there's a V word that keeps coming up, and it's vulnerability. Really being able to have an open and honest conversation in a safe space with people that you trust, and start talking about this. And what you'll find is that statistically, and the statistics are all over the place, but I've read as high as 80% of all entrepreneurs, and these numbers get larger when you get into female entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs that are founders of color, any type of minority group. These numbers start really going up, getting closer to the 100%. But everybody's felt some version of this. Now, again, I argue that it's important for us to really look at imposter syndrome as that more closer to the higher end spectrum of that pathological level of self-doubt. But everybody's experienced some level of doubt. If for you it is crippling, if for you it is limiting, then again, some of those tools there, therapy's a good one. Having that community, having mentors that you can rely on, and then just talking about it. But that continuous research is something that it's not a session that you can go in, you can sit down, you listen to the session, and you walk out and you're done.
Right.
It's a learning process because there's so many nuances and so many variables, and it's dependent upon you and specific to you and the psychological community. The word syndrome, imposter syndrome. Psychologists will tell you it's not a syndrome. Syndrome has requirements, classifications, so we're not even calling it the right thing. But that's the accepted term. The original term was actually imposter phenomenon. The 1970, I think it was 8 article from Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes. It was imposter phenomenon, and it was specific to women in the workforce. But it's been a lot more democratized. Again, my argument is maybe it's been a little overly democratized, where it's gotten into this. If you've ever felt doubt, then you have imposter syndrome. I don't believe that. I do believe there is something else to it.
So are you a fan of like business coaching, or do you feel like business coaches can kind of fill some of that role, or maybe even like as entrepreneurs grow and their business grows, maybe like an EOS group or something, something where they can kind of bounce ideas off of? Are you a fan of that kind of coaching?
So the way I found, I was having lunch with a business coach that we had just taken on, and I was explaining to this person something, and I'd known this guy for a while, so there was a comfort level. And I explained the feelings that I was having as a new business owner. And he asked a simple question. He said, "Have you ever heard of imposter syndrome?" And it was like he reached in and twisted this lens and my world came into focus a little bit more. And what I realized is it was the start of something, not the end of something. Just having that clarity was the beginning of the journey. And then I spent the next probably 10 years working on a better understanding of how imposter syndrome had impacted me over the years. This guy also happened to be our EOS coach, EOS
Cool.
implementer as well. So I'm a huge fan of both. And, when I categorize mentors, even in that sort of official mentoring that a business coach kind of is, that's one that's also very important. Just having people that can share their learned experiences. If you think you have imposter syndrome, talking to someone that understands it, and has spent time researching it, is important.
So do you feel like that was a catalyst for where you're at today to kind of propel you forward?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It was one of the most, that one simple question I say was one of the most transformative moments in my life. From that point forward, it was as though, a door that I was trying to get somewhere and I didn't even know where the door was. And the door flings open, and now I'm able to go through the door. Well, when I got through the other side, I thought, oh, yay, I've arrived. And then I look around and go, no, I've just started. This is just the starting line. But at least I had that clarity, and it was very catalytic. It was very transformative. And it gave me the tools to start understanding and digging deeper into, there's this thing that I do that is a component of imposter syndrome. There's self-limitation. And guess what? A lot of people have experienced. There's TED Talks, there's books, there's all these resources out there that you can start trying to understand and trying to learn from. And then you start understanding yourself better. And, here's in my conversations, one of the things that I say that is a little sort of the deep, dark secret is it doesn't go away for those of us that it's an integral part of who we are. You don't conquer it. You don't kill it. You don't squash it. There's two things that you can do. One is manage it. That's a term that I like. But there's also a paradoxical one, and it's called that I talk about in some of the work that I do, and it's harnessing it. There are a lot of great voices out there right now that are talking about the idea of imposter syndrome as almost a form of neurodivergence, and in some ways a superpower. It is a driver for many of us that we're always trying to prove that voice wrong, might be one of the ways to look at it. And so it can actually compel us to accomplishment, as paradoxical and as ironic as it might seem.
Wow. So Johnny, when you first sat down with your business coach, EOS implementer, the guy that kind of asked you that first question of imposter syndrome, were you in a place at that moment where you felt like you were struggling and just couldn't get over a certain hurdle or hump, or was it just something that he brought up that you didn't even really realize?
No, I knew that the problem was there. I just didn't have the framework to understand what it was. And also sort of didn't know, is what I'm feeling even normal? But what I was experiencing was a crippling level of self-doubt. I was a new business owner. Before that, I'd been in sales directly for the telecom carriers. So I'd always had this, sort of comfortable role as a salesperson. I'd been doing it for 15 years. Before that, I was driving a forklift. I was a blue collar kid. And there's a lot of dynamics with especially in the channel, where a blue collar background, and then you're stepping into the world of the white collar C-level executives sitting down with CIOs and CTOs. There is a large triggering component to that scenario for anyone in our industry in the channel. And there is a high level of blue collar background folks. That can create a large uh, a large feeling of the imposter syndrome. Any sort of scenario where you find yourself in the place as the other. I don't belong here. Hugely triggering.
Yeah, I can attest to
And
that one.
yeah, there you go. Well, and it's you talked about the consulting side. If someone's getting into consulting, here's the running joke that we had is when we put consultant in our titles. You know what led to that? Like what gave us the authority to do that? We turned 45. That was it. And the other one was we just decided to. And so when you decide to put the moniker of consultant on there, you didn't go to school for that. There's no certification on that. I mean, there are certs, but in our industry, there really aren't. You just slap the title of consultant on one day and suddenly you have to become that. And
yeah, I'm always fascinated with the titles that people choose. Like you go to somebody's LinkedIn bio. Here's one that always gets me is when you see somebody say like ex Google, ex AWS or whatever. And I'm like, why is that a badge of honor?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there, in the tools that measure imposter syndrome, you may have just stumbled onto one. LinkedIn profiles that are overly explained could be an indicator of some latent imposter syndrome. Anywhere where you're trying to overcome that imposter syndrome. That's actually part of when you look at the self-limitation, that's a logical thing. I have doubt, therefore I'm going to allow it to not let me move forward. That makes sense. But I talk a lot about the paradoxical side of imposter syndrome. Sometimes a person that you look at that you may go, this person is arrogant. This person is overly self-confident. Often that's really just an overcompensation for, someone that's scared and riddled with self-doubt inside. And so, some of the things that I've always said, some of the best versions of myself and some of the worst versions of myself often are rooted in the same place, and it's that imposter syndrome component. But oftentimes when you see that overcompensation, might be an indicator.
Yeah, I recently did a video talking about how independent consultants, guys like you and I, which I know you've exited your company and you've kind of moved on to some other things, but we still go up against sometimes guys like the Big Four, Accenture, Bain, McKinsey, we run into these guys, and I say it all the time that we can do most, if not all, of what those guys do at a fraction of the cost. And a lot of clients just don't believe us. And so I have felt it before where sometimes that doubt creeps in, right? Where you're going, am I really good enough to go up against these guys? Because I have. We beat out McKinsey. RSM McGladrey, we beat out in a contact center out in San Francisco. And I was on a call with RSM and the client, and RSM was pushing Cisco. And I told the client, I'm like, you don't want to do Cisco. You're going to have to hire 3 engineers to manage this. Why would you want to go there? I was giving him enough doubt to where he got me on a call with the guys over at RSM. And I said, well, who's going to sell him the Cisco? And they said, oh, we are. And I went, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
And so the client went with us. They understood. We were giving them good sound advice. But dude, I know you've probably been there before too, going up against some of the big consultants, but how does a smaller consultant arm themselves enough with not just knowledge, but the just the overall confidence to be able to go in there and go toe to toe with some of the larger consulting firms,
Yeah.
that are out there.
Well, so for me, the one of the tools, and I've found this I've used this in many scenarios that it's been helpful, but I really try to go back to two kind of fundamental things. And if you think about, especially at imposter syndrome levels, but really any general self-doubt, um, it's a feeling, and feelings are fickle, right? Um, the level of these feelings can actually allow you to ignore facts. Facts like I accomplished the thing, the plaques on the wall, I sold the company, I built the company, we grew the company, um, you know, got the girl, whatever the accomplishment is. Imposter syndrome can put uh, that fuzzy lens over those things. But if you really gravitate towards those factual components, there's two questions that I think someone in those shoes could ask. And the first question is, from where do I gain my authority?
Mm.
Because if I'm competing against McKinsey and I try to out McKinsey, guess what? I lose. But as a small, nimble operator, my authority kind of came from a different place. As someone who had navigated the telecommunications world for as long as I had, my authority came from a different place. And it's very clarifying to understand, if I'm standing here for a reason. What do I have and what do I not have? From where do I gain my authority? And then the second one, and I think it's the most valuable, is where do I deliver value? And I know value is a really big word, but in a lot of ways, that's what you asked when you were asking, well, when these guys come in, what is it that they do and where are they delivering value? And, the one of the more powerful questions one time I asked is, someone said, well, your shop is smaller.
Yep.
Your organization is small. And the question I came back with was, what is the virtue of big? You have a big provider now. You told me you were miserable. You told me that they weren't capable in the way that you need them to be. You told me they weren't nimble in the way that you need them to be. And, the insanity, what is it? Insanity is repeating the same thing and changing nothing, whatever,
Yeah.
and expecting different results. And honestly, that one question of what is the virtue of big suddenly opened up an understanding on the client side that allowed them to get past those initial feelings of brand recognition with a company like be it a McKinsey, or if you're competing small provider versus AT&T or whoever. Oftentimes really boiling it down and asking those questions of that orient towards value can be really powerful.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to use that one, man. I'm stealing that one. But yeah, we've always been a big fan of just answering questions with questions.
Yeah.
Hey, do you think it's good to move to the cloud? Well, why do you want to move to the cloud?
Why? Yeah, such a powerful word. But sometimes that question is just as much an internal question for the person. I'll give you an example. I in the role that I play at the Entrepreneur Center, I was paired and actually was taking over from someone who, in the McKinsey concept, she was almost like a McKinsey. She was a very accomplished woman, very well known as an entrepreneur. In a like for like comparison, talk about triggering imposter syndrome. This person had been accomplished multiple times over, and was just on paper, she's just more accomplished than I am,
Mm-hmm.
and just in reality more accomplished than I am. And so Beth is her name. If I tried to out Beth, I lose. And she was very helpful in this, in really trying to arm me with, if you take this role over, you have to make it yours. And it got back to those two questions. Where do I gain my authority? And where do I deliver value? And when I really kind of changed the outlook on that, I realized that focus on my strengths, focus on where I've had accomplishments. And even if that self-doubt is in the back of my head telling me no, I still have a pathway to progress and go through and say, here are my credentials, here are the things that I've accomplished, here's the experience that I have, here's the value I bring.
Yeah.
And that can be a really powerful conversation, not just externally, but internally.
So tell me a little bit about what you're doing today, because I know you've got your podcast. It's called The Impodsters, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about what you're doing, because I know you've exited from your company. You've kind of moved on a little bit. What are you doing? And, how are you still kind of connected to this whole imposter syndrome thing?
Sure. So I have a book that's been half pregnant for a while that is called The Damage Advantage is the working title. And it's basically it is a coaching book for professionals, typically in leadership. And the entire concept is there in the title, The Damage Advantage. You have a secret power in your crippling doubt, and there's a way that you can harness it, put a saddle on it and ride. Goes a little deeper than that, but that's the nutshell, and it's a framework that allows for leaders that experience imposter syndrome to understand themselves a little bit better, and then put something into place. And it's not the end all be all. It's not the solution. It's just a framework that allows them to see a little bit better, and then some really easy to use functional methodologies on how to approach the world if you do identify someone who suffers with imposter syndrome. I've really enjoyed the heck out of taking the past probably 2 years now and working at both the Entrepreneur Center and the Nashville Technology Council. There's leadership programs there that deliver such an incredible level of value to me and learning experience, and just meeting new people and learning things about myself and learning things about them and the world and others. Great networking that occurs. But for the past 6 to 8 months, I've actually been also working on a startup. So I am getting over into the marketing and marketing tech side. My experience at RCG, part of what we did was we built this really one-of-a-kind business model with this incredible brand that was behind it. And there's a lot of things about that translate over to this new solution that I'm trying to build that really delves into brand valuation. How does one go about the very difficult task of putting a US dollar valuation on a brand, something very intangible? That's what I'm working on now.
Putting the US dollar on a brand?
Yes. Interesting. No.
So explain that.
How much is Nike, the brand, worth? If you removed Nike from every shoe and it was just a shoe, generic, you didn't know what it was on the shelf, how many people would buy that shoe? How many people would pay a premium for that shoe? So what is a brand worth? What value does a brand bring? And Steve Forbes said, a brand is your most valuable asset. Okay, that sounds great. What does that mean? Where can I find it on my balance sheet? And the answer is often you can't. And so what we're trying to do is and there's other versions of this out there, but what we're trying to do is build a recurring monthly updated valuation on a brand. And so what it should show is brand initiatives, things that are being done to impact the power, the equity of a brand that should reflect an evaluation process. And so we built a formula, we patented a process, and think Credit Karma, maybe with a little bit of Kelley Blue Book, because it's in US dollar valuation. So a blend of Credit Karma and Kelley Blue Book, but for brands. And it's a fascinating conversation and something that's near and dear to my heart, because as someone who had built the brand and understands brand strategy and had some frustrations along the way as well, I've taken those frustrations and let them sort of inform my approach to this new offering that we're building.
So basically, you're helping clients build perceived value, right?
That would be one way of putting it. What I would really say is it's the initial thing is it's bringing to light, it's realizing actual value. And if the analogy that I use is you have a sales rep and you have a brand, and both of them are out there in the world working, right? They're out there making impact. They're out there influencing buying decisions. They're out there making people make irrational decisions. Louis Vuitton bags go for a certain amount, and like, what explains that extra that's being paid? It's that brand. And so if that brand is out there working and putting in the work, then should pull in that brand is responsible for a certain level of revenue. How do you define that? We've come up with a formula for that piece. And then how do you look at brand initiatives that are out there in the world? And it might be the digital world, or the ability for a customer to pay a premium. There's all these little things that come into play that are based around the science of brand. And they tie into what we believe is the actual valuation of that brand. And anybody that's ever sold a company, I walked into the sale of my company, and I had a lot of really smart people. And what I say is I had a lot of smart people telling me dumb things. And that's probably a little overt, but there were a lot of things that initially to me sounded as though they were science. And what I found is they all had the delusion of precision, that someone would say, this is the way that it's done, and this is how you put it. EBITDA times a multiplier.
Right.
And, that it's like, that's so regimented. And we go, okay, well, what's the multiplier? And they go somewhere between 9 and 12% times EBITDA. Okay, which one is it? Well, somewhere between 9 and 12%. What? I thought this was precise. I thought this was some exact science. And, end of the day, there were so many myths that were dispelled around how a company gets a business valuation. We think that holds true also, that it's more about methodology, process. End of the day, it's, how much will someone pay for something? That's what evaluation is. Nothing more, nothing less. There's a lot of methods that can be used. And we're building a method that does that for brand. And we think that it's a fair conversation. We think that people put a lot of time, money, attention, and love into brands, and they are creating not intangible value, but inherent, intrinsic value, actual value. And the last part is, if you ever sell a company, or if you ever acquire a company, and you've suddenly, maybe you've paid more than what's being realized in the business valuation. There's this interesting little line on a balance sheet called goodwill. And have someone try to explain goodwill to you, and they'll twist themselves into a knot. And they'll have good definitions out there of what goodwill is. But oftentimes, if you buy a company and what you've bought is a brand, and there's a delta where the business valuation, that's maybe it's EBITDA times a number, doesn't translate over, that there's a number setting over in goodwill that oftentimes can be explained by, what is that? And it's like, well, that's the value of the brand itself. Well, why can that not occur before? Where does it go when there's not the goodwill post M&A? So I'm getting a little deep into these things, and fascinating topic, and something we could talk about at a later time. But,
I'll be interested to know kind of where that goes and when you guys actually launch and everything else.
Absolutely.
So let me circle back to the beginning of this conversation. We started talking about, if maybe somebody wanted to get into consulting, they're trying to figure it all out. Is this right for me? Maybe I've been in technology sales for a long time and I want to, go out on my own. I mean, that's what I did in 2010. I just said, I'm done with all the M&A activity and I'm out. Luckily, I had a wife that supported me because, you probably understand it wasn't easy
Yeah.
the first couple of years. Um, but what would you say if considering imposter syndrome and everything that we've talked about, where should somebody start if they wanted to get into this industry?
Um, you know, I'll talk about the psychological readiness component since we're talking about imposter syndrome, and I take you back to those two questions: where do I gain my authority, and where do I bring value? And that could be just an honest assessment. Do I have the experience that I can go out and charge for my time? Which leads us to the next part, and that's I've seen so many people, especially in the channel side, where they want to go in and they call themselves a consultant, but they don't charge for it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you're not charging for your time, then you're an agent. You're a broker. Where do you make your money oftentimes is a great indicator of whether or not you're an actual consultant. Consultant is you're paying me for my consultancy. You're paying me for my opinion, my advice, and I watch a lot of people give that piece away. And if you want to be a broker agent, go be a broker agent. Don't call yourself a consultant. If you want to be a consultant, charge for your time
Yeah.
because it's valuable.
I'm glad you said that because I've been preaching that for years.
Yeah.
We started charging. Well, when I started my company, I started as a consulting company. One of my first customers was they were a PR firm in Midtown Manhattan, and they had 2 floors of a building in Midtown Manhattan, moving a big Nortel Option 11 and wanted to bring in a new system. And we looked at all kinds of different systems, and I was not, I had no idea what the channel was at the time, right? I just knew I'm a guy that knows telecom. I'm going to help you migrate this thing over to a new platform. And that's what we did, just charged for our time. And so we've always done that. And I never understood people that didn't charge for their time. I get that there's sometimes it's just a transaction, right?
Yeah.
There's no consulting in it. Yes, I can order you a circuit or whatever. But to say that, I'm a consultant and then not charge for your time, I think, like you say, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah. And it's also, in a lot of ways, the client, it's harder for the client to understand where you're coming from and what your role is to them. And, to me, it's always, where's the incentivization? Because that
Mhm.
often is where, where I'm going to bring value or where I'm motivated to bring value. And we had a blended model at RCG. We started off as an agency. We turned into an outsourced telecom department. So we brought people, process, and systems to the table. And so we had to square this circle and live by our own statements in a way that stayed true and stayed, I'll use the term integrity, that operated with integrity. And the conversation is we're building all of these resources, these people, process, and systems. And consulting was really just a part of it. Actually, the way we structured it was we were outsourced middle management. So we weren't
Gotcha.
even consultants in a lot of ways. We were quite literally a part of your team, and we were bringing management methodology and an understanding of how telecom works. And that middle management layer that we brought in as a part of our telecom department as a service really wasn't even consulting. It was an integrated middle management offering. And then the pull through that we kept our agency side. And we had to explain that a lot of times. And the explanation was pretty simple. You're paying us a large amount of money here. This is a transactional component that as the agent, we can use to augment our service fees. If you want to be pure service, we'll charge you a lot of money. And one other problem that came into play is if we're not the agent, we don't have the control that we need to be able to really manage your account well. because if it's ours, we can go in and pull the strings and make the changes and make the moves. But if we're not the agent of record, then I lose a level of control. So the client, they looked at that and said, I get it. As far as a conflict of interest goes, I see how you're incented, and I like the fact that you're able to access that funding to offset my fees. And it made sense for everybody. But
Yeah.
but that front end charging for time is something that value your time. If you don't value your time, why's the client? And so figuring out how to charge for your time and justify that and come up with a framework and be comfortable with it, it's always a first step that's
So
critical.
you're doing some mentoring now, right?
Correct.
So through that mentoring, do you talk about some of these things and, helping some of these entrepreneurs getting started?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the founders that I'm working with at the Entrepreneur Center, a lot of them are from every vertical walk of life, and very few of them are actually in the tech side, or at least the tech advisor side. There's some companies that have SaaS platforms, but I'm also working with a lady that has an incredible line of keto-friendly pasta sauce. I'm working with a guy that does weed chocolate. These are some really neat entrepreneurs. And so initially that was a little intimidating for me. But what I found was a lot of what I'm there to talk about, there are experts behind me that go down into, the esoteric topics. The basics were things that I had learned just as being a business person through EOS. And all of the nuances of EOS, and then just through all the mistakes. And so these founders that I'm working with, the term value comes up a lot. And there's a lot of times where that value may be value your product. You're not charging enough for your product. You're not charging enough for your time. You're missing revenue opportunities components. And so look for where you deliver value is kind of a universal business discussion that I think is an important one. And so I get to have that conversation a lot.
Cool. Well, I know we're kind of near the time that we would normally go here, Johnny. So what I want to do wrapping this up is just give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, where's the best place to reach out to you, whether that's social or websites or whatever.
Yeah, I'm a big LinkedIn fan. Easiest way to find me is my LinkedIn profile. Go to if you're on LinkedIn, my handle is Johnny on Brand, and you can find me there. My email address Johnny_Anderson@me.com. And I love having conversations about imposter syndrome, about being a business owner and some of the challenges that come along with it, being a technology advisor and some of the challenges there. Always willing to help people that are trying to learn, expand, grow, especially if you're in the greater Nashville area, but not exclusively.
Yeah. Well, great town. I actually had my Nash t-shirt on yesterday.
I love it.
Yeah. But yeah,
welcome
man,
to Nashville. Now y'all go home.
Yeah. It's a fun place. I like Nashville. But man, it is growing so fast. Ooh.
Yeah. Agreed.
I mean, I know that. I live in Orlando, right? I mean, one of the fastest growing places. But I will put all that information in the description, of this video. And so if somebody wants to get in touch with you, you can click on some of those links there. But Johnny, man, this has been good. I appreciate the conversation, man.
Enjoyed it thoroughly. Have a good rest of the day.
All right. Take care, man.
See you.
Bye.